I'm just kidding. This is Jim the Keys bartender coming to you live from the Florida Keys. I've just been doing a little tweaking with this. I realized that I shouldn't play the music that long. Just use a little quick intro. You hear that music, it's Keys bartender and it's going to come on. It's going to be pretty mediocre. No, no, no. Try to be up to date. Try to be contemporaneous. But here we are in the Florida Keys. It's July 7th. We made it to a July 4th. All of Miami-Dade County and Broward County and Palm Beach County did not make their way to the Florida Keys. At least, um, it was kind of busy. It was busy for the 4th. It was traditional busy. Not other people may object to the characterization that we were inundated. I don't think we were inundated. The up to date, I am cognizant that you guys, wherever you're listening, in any part of the world, most of you are going through the similar things we have. But what's unique with the Keys is that we are just a long, thin stretch of island that's connected to the mainland by a highway. So it's a continuation. It's a lifeline. It's free flowing. It's not like airplanes and things like that. When you for a chain of islands, we are connected. There's 43 bridges that connect us all the way down to Key West. So whenever let's say we're getting threatened by a hurricane down here, the movement goes north, and when things, holidays come up and things people want to do in the water, people migrate south down the Keys, and so we're just to reiterate, there's about 18 miles of called the stretch. The one access, there's two accesses to the Keys. One's Cardsale Road, but the I hesitate to say the main one comes. They both start around the same place, right around Florida City. One goes a little farther north, Cardsale Road, and it takes you to the top, very, very, very top of the Keys, slightly south of the farthest part of our reach is the Ocean Reef community, the gated community there, and the stretch that is the Highway US 1 goes a little further south, about 14 miles south, and takes you into North Key Largo around mile marker 107, let's say. So we've had all these things. I guess you're familiar with Florida. It's Florida being Florida. We're up there with Texas and California. California being a much bigger state, but Florida has a huge growth in COVID-19, and I'm going to try to get away from doing the whole show on that, but it's hard not to, considering this is the Keys Bartender Show, and every moment of every day, it seems like, when someone walks in the door, there's a reminder that things are different. And someone just said they're tired of hearing the word new normal. I'll call it what you will, but that's what is mandated in the Keys. You have to wear a face mask. You have to try to keep social distances and things like that. And we're seeing subtle changes in that, even though it's not really affecting our numbers. We have people that normally they had problems with the mask, and now they seem to be wearing it. And maybe we'll get into that. Oh, well, we'll get in a little later. But I want to recount a story, and it has nothing to do with COVID-19. But I'm going to segue with it into COVID-19, which works perfectly. But at the bar, many times we have people come in, and so was a group of semi-regular people. They're regulars at our bar, and they're more regular now that the bars are closed, and the place they normally would hang out is not open. So we get some regulars from other places, but I'm familiar with them. And they're sitting together, and it's two couples and one guy, and the one guy's wife is working off the island, and she's making her way back, and it's in the afternoon. And out of nowhere, I hear a comment. The guy with his gravelly voice. Let's call him Albert. And he says something like this. I just hear, and this is the thing you always hear. There was a friend of mine who said at one time, she just threw out the comment, you know, she was talking about, I know I'm jumping around a lot, but this was a friend of mine who was talking about their agenda for her friends during the time. She said, oh, we're going to go in, but we'll go by the pool around 12 o'clock, and then we'll have a little lunch, and then we'll have some drinks, and then we'll go down for happy hour, and then 8 o'clock, anal sex. And she was just saying it as a joke at the bar, but I heard that, and I just pick up on things. And she meant it as a joke. But that picked up, and I thought that was perfect. So just remember, when you say something, the bartenders just shut down to listen to things. But when they hear something unique, boy, it's like it's definitely a dog whistle for us when we hear something like this, whether someone's threatening somebody or something like that. A lot of bartenders have this innate sense, and when something interesting, dangerous, salacious is said, it's called your ears prick up and you're listening. So Albert, with his gravelly voice, says, you know, she thinks she's the boss. Well, I'm the boss. You know, more like she thinks she's the boss, but I'm the boss. And my, ears pricked up, like I said, and I said, well, Albert, let me tell you this from my experience. People who say what you just said, she thinks she's the boss, but I'm the boss, are usually not the boss, because the boss doesn't have to say anything. I'm the boss here. I'm in charge. Yeah, things like that. You have to remind people like that. There's people that are in charge, and they're in charge. And, in certain situations, military situations, stuff like that, who's a senior officer here and blah, 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 blah. That's, you fall in chain of command and things like that. But there's sometimes when, certain groups of people, you can see when someone is the decision maker, and there's other people that are more democratic, let's say. But in relationships, it's funny, people mention the boss thing all the time, and when they do say that, I almost certainly say, when they do make a point that saying, I'm the boss of my house and stuff, almost 100% of the time they're not the boss. Yeah, they could be cruel, they could be the most brutal person in the house and things like that. Okay, yeah, you could be a dictator, but I'm talking dictators aside, abusive relationships and stuff like that, you're a horrible person, don't do that. But I'm just saying, in a non-abusive relationship where decisions are being made and debated and things like that, when you have to point out that you're the boss, usually aren't. And let me hand back a couple things about that. There was a guy in the Reagan White House, Alexander Haig. He was a military guy who was, I think he was Nixon's national security advisor at one time. He was the commander of NATO forces, the U.S. commander of he was a U.S. general who was a commander of all NATO forces at one time, especially during the height of the Cold War. And then one fateful day, when Hinckley shot Reagan, Alexander Haig made a similar comment that my friend Albert made. And someone, I don't know if the question was asked, but he made the statement at the White House press room while Reagan was away. Reagan was in town, and I don't think George Bush was in the White House at the time. But Alexander Haig says, well, I'm in charge now. I'm in charge here. Thing like that. He may have meant, like right here, the operations room, I may be in charge. He might have said that, but what he said, the optics said, I'm in charge here. And what he did was a horrible, let's say, a very big faux pas. Because in the chain of succession, at least in the United States, he's number 5. The state Secretary of State was number 5. And I think it was Secretary of State time. If it was National Security Advisor, he was not in the chain of command till way down. I mean, the Secretary of Agriculture is ahead of him. But I think it was Secretary of State, which would make him number 5. So what he did, what he said, kind of skipped over. It would be like the baby in the household saying it. And then we're going to get on the, segue into the baby thing. Skipped over the Vice President, then the Speaker of the House, the President pro tem of the Senate, and then there's the, so you have the President, the Vice President, Speaker of the House, Senate pro tem, and then number 5 would be Secretary of State. And you see how that predicament, he lived with that for the longest time. He was a very competent guy. Alexander Haig was a wealth of information, very experienced and stuff like that. But his big mistake in the political science circle was to go and say in front of people, I think I have a similar thing to it. He may have spoken a bit too much at that time. But let's get back to the I'm the boss thing. How hard it would be when people ask me in front of my wife or ask me when they're not around, they go and say, well, who's the boss in your house? And it's very easy thing to say, and costs me nothing to say she is. Some men or some people say that's your dignity, Jim. Why don't you just say you're the boss? How hard is that? So it's not true. Simply isn't true. It may not be true that she's the boss either. It's wishy-washy to say, it's a partnership. Sometimes we take her view, sometimes I take my view. But when you stake out that point that you're the boss in a relationship, then there's several things that you're assuming. You're assuming responsibility for everything that's right and wrong, all the decisions that are made. And you're assuming that that person's going along with you on their own volition. They're going to be happy with that, or you don't care that they're happy with it. That's a problem also. So saying someone is the boss is not giving them a tell-all power over you. In government, that may be the thing. You got to be careful who you give power to. But in a relationship, you're just saying it. In almost any times you have an issue, where you're going to go on vacation, what you're going to have for dinner, what are we going to do this weekend, and stuff like that. It's a group decision, a couple's decision. So how hard is it? So there are drastic examples of people being in charge as people that rule over their families with an iron fist. And if you want to see what being in charge totally looks like, all you have to do is look at a dictatorship. And there was a movie, and I hesitate to call it a comedy, okay, because it's based on it's based on historical events. It's called the Death of Stalin, and it begins in post-World War II Soviet Union, and Joseph Stalin, who was the leader all through World War II, prior to World War II, and a lot of people don't realize Joseph Stalin actually, killed millions and millions and millions of his own people and other people as well. But Stalin was a dictator, but the Death of Stalin narrates or shows what happened right towards the end of his rule. They're showing how he, the things he demanded, what he demanded from people, the repercussions for not doing what he said to the T, and the whims, and if something goes wrong and someone's attributed, you don't want to take under a Stalinist regime. It's hard for it. You don't really want to take any responsibility, something like that. First of all, you don't want to tell the dictator to do anything wrong, and then you don't want to be seen as a competitor for power. And if you're not a competitor for power, you just go along with what they say. But the bad thing with being under dictatorship, sometimes, if something bad does go on, sometimes they need a scapegoat. and that scapegoat could be you. But right at the end of that death, you have to really watch out, watch closely. But when there's a dictator, when it finally dies, when you have a total control, there is a scramble. There was a scramble for power, and that's documented in the movie The Death of Stalin. So right after his death, and I don't want to really give it away, just watch closely what they do to the people that supported him, you know, and how they purged the loyalists and things like that. And the same thing could be said right now. It's going on in real time in North Korea. You have the sister of Kim Jong Il taking higher responsibility in his state, and you don't see him as much. And I always thought that was kind of tricky, that he was sitting back. Originally they thought he was very ill and he may have died, but they've just seen him time and time again. But then there's a lot of they have people in North Korea that look like Kim Jong-un or King, whatever his name is, man. There was Kim Il Sung, Kim Jong Il, Kim Jong Un, I think it is. I forget all these things, but his sister is kind of like the second in command, and the way she behaves is she's supposedly more brutal than him. But you'll see when that happens. You'll see loyalists and people once they establish that when and the succession will happen eventually. You'll see once a dictator dies, a lot of people die after him, but it's so tightly controlled. And I always see a dictatorship and say, who the fuck wants to really be in charge of something like that? Is that a dream come true? I don't know. But we're going to move on from that. So we established we're not the boss all the time, and we don't have to. So this weekend we had lots of people come in. And conversely to the weeks prior, we didn't have anybody make a big objection to wearing the mask. There are people that forget when they come in, they forget to pull it up, they have it, and things like that. But there was a table on the Friday night. There was a table of people from the mainland who said none of them had masks. And we had them outside. So if they were from the mainland, we think they required it. Miami-Dade, Broward, and things. They require it in their places, so we don't really understand what's going on there. But they sat outside. That was the one. But they didn't complain about it. But and yesterday there was a couple that came in, and they had their mask in their hands, and they were walking, and walked up to their table and they sat down, and before we could say anything, but we just told them gently, please, if you get up from your table, please put on your mask. And they looked at us like they were pained to have to do it, and they looked miserable. Miserable looks miserable. That means you're not smiling. People say, how do you know what's going through their head? I don't know. They both didn't look happy, husband and wife. I understand that your life has become burdensome being paired with each other, but don't put others at risk. And speaking of risk, there's another thing that has to be probably said, and that's how do we deal with people now? Some of the listeners, most of the listeners, I believe, trust in most of them trust in the preventions that are suggested by our experts, and that's medical experts. And I don't mean a dentist or a podiatrist, though they do I know they do study a long time, but I'm talking about epidemiologists, people familiar with communicable diseases. Okay, we're going to call them the expert. We're not going to call some fringe press person or politician or institute the expert. Okay, for years I'm not going to argue the mask with you. And someone showed me on Friday. They showed me It was pretty brutal, and I wouldn't really do this myself, but it was a dry erase board in front of a restaurant or a chalkboard, and it said, for mask required to enter the restaurant. If you wish to debate us about the efficacy of wearing a mask, we'll be happy to do that at a later date when masks are not required. When you're trying to sell the clothing of your dead grandmother. That was brutal. That was brutal. And I paraphrase and stuff like that, but I mean, I I would not. I don't wish anybody. I don't like to see anything. I hear Donald Trump Jr.'s girlfriend got sick from it, COVID-19, and I had a friend of mine who's an older gentleman who didn't believe it was as dangerous as it was. Realized uh, he was in the group that was uh, the most severely affected, but he didn't feel it was as dangerous as that. He think people were overblowing it. Well, his son got it. Now he's in a medically induced coma. He's on a ventilator, and the only response, even though we talked about how important it was, and he didn't believe in the mask, and he thought people were overreacting, the only response I could give as a friend would be, I hope he gets well. Now, when we're debating people about the effectiveness of a mask and whether you're doing it, who you're doing it for prevention, and his friend said that they suspect through contact tracing that his son contracting it from his coworkers who he got together with infrequently. And when you say got together for work because they were working from home, and the time they got together, he picked it up. And the guy may not be in the best shape, but he's in his 50s, so that was really, really the thing. This really surprising thing is these younger people getting it. Yes, the percentages are lower with the other people, but I suspect, these people, they said to us when we asked them to wear a mask, and they complain about it. They call it what do they call this mask? They call it the slave covering. They're complying. All these things they want you to do, like they have no problem doing. And the one thing you do for other people, and don't get me right or wrong, those masks primarily, number one, is for other people. It's not for you. It helps you a little, but it helps if you're sick and you don't know it, you're asymptomatic, and you may, like I said, if you sometimes it's a luxury, being sick, then you can get someone sick. Yeah, it's already that ship left the dock, but we're talking about taking care of people before when they're asymptomatic. You got to wear that mask. So we've had less people argue about that. You had some miserable people. Still complaining about it. Got to watch the social distancing. I had a friend sit down next to a person that was coming at the bar. You're allowed to use a bar for counter service, right? But they still got to be distant. And there was a group of people that were together, and I said, yes, you can be together if you're together. But they were moving closer to someone that was not with them. They came in to pick up their food, and I said, listen, you're going to have to move apart. And I know it's a little brutal to be able to tell back to that I'm the boss thing, but they're starting to get it. They understand. The places are closing down, and we have restaurants that are closing down because people are infected and they're being tested, and our numbers are about they're approaching three times the number of what they were before they opened the stretch. So now I suspect this weekend did a number on, so right now we're maybe in a mid to upper 300s, and we're only 75,000 people down here. We're probably, I suspect at the end of the week, will probably be closer to 500 to 600 people down here. We're doing pretty good. The mainland's not doing so hot, and I think on Wednesday they're closing all the restaurants in Miami-Dade to dine in, so it's only going to be takeout and delivery. And there's a whole bunch of other places like gyms, movie theaters, stuff that'll be closing. So they're moving backwards because of our failure to do the minimum to because I guess they're frightened over the infection rate, meaning from the test, the positive rate. And if you're not familiar with that, it's I guess to put it plainly is if they give a test to, let's say, 1,000 people, the positive rate was how many people are going to be positive out of 1,000 people you suspect have came in contact. And then we're not talking about random 1,000 people taken. People just tested. It's people that are tested. Most people, at least in Florida, are tested because they may have come in contact with someone or they may have signs of some of the symptoms. So that's the thing. If you came in contact with someone, you may have the symptoms, or perhaps if you're you have to be tested for a particular job or something like that. So the positive rate was 25%, saying, but they wanted it to be below 10%, meaning only 10% of the people that are tested are down with the COVID-19. But then we're obviously dealing with that. So we've had off that stuff. We're going to go back to the drinking thing. I'm a bartender, and I had a young lady come up to me who, a young lady, almost everyone. The sad thing about being, when I say young lady, most of the people that come up to me nowadays are younger than I am. It was years ago, I could say they were my age or older, but now, as that number, the percentages are not going well in my favor. So this younger woman comes up to me, and she asked for a vodka and cranberry, and she ready to pay for it. She's sitting at a table, and I'm like, and she's doing it secretly, and I know what that means. That means that they want to have a drink without another person watching, and that's an odd drink to order from someone. A cocktail glass with cranberry, and then she takes her drink and goes into the ladies' room, which is fully visible from the table she got up from in this other room, the line of sight, and she's walking into the bathroom. She was at the bar for a minute, 2 minutes while she's paying for it, and then she goes in the bathroom with a drink. At the same time, the man at her table that's with her, could be a boyfriend or husband or something like that, he follows her right in the bathroom. It's not a big bathroom, so the door's open. He's talking to her, having somewhat heated words about, I assume the drink. And then he leaves and stuff, and goes back to the table. She comes out like about 5 minutes later with drink in hand, looks in the room again, and then goes back into the bathroom for 6 minutes. Taking her a long time, and I don't get it. I guess she wants a drink, but she can't drink it. The people that sneak drinks usually get, can I have a shot? They just want to drink a shot. And I think she wanted a shot. And she came back later on that night. It was funny. She's across the street. She came back later that night, and she ordered the same drink. And she said, I have a hard time drinking that drink. I just want to get a drink in me. And she goes, can I have a shot of vodka? I'm like, holy crap. Give her a shot of Tito's or something like that. And she's having a hard time drinking that. She takes the drink, pours it into her other drink, starts sipping that again. And really, she didn't quite finish her drink. But she's out. I don't know what she's doing. She goes back in the bathroom with her drink, and she's livened up when she comes back out. So it just made me assume that there were things not apparent, meaning it may not have been all about the drink. And then that same day, or the next day, it's kind of blurring together. A woman comes up and asks for a Long Island iced tea, and she's at a table with a gentleman and her 2 daughters. I assume the two daughters. They're like 9 and 7. She's not driving. The guy's driving. He's having like one beer, maybe two. And she goes, "I've had a Long Island iced tea." And the second time she came in, which was yesterday, she has two, but she orders them at the bar. And they have me bring them to the table and stuff like that. And she's hiding it from her 8 and 6 year old, something like that. That's when you're hiding it from your kids. And I think pretty much, I know the guy really well. I don't think he was, it could be his niece. It could be a woman he's interested in. I don't know. But that's a sure sign. You promise someone you wouldn't drink, and there you are. What do you do? Drink. Just that's a sad state of affair when you're in a vacation place that you have to sneak. The saddest thing. I enjoyed the times I enjoyed drinking. I didn't. It was nice enjoying a drink when you didn't have to worry about any repercussions, anybody judging you or anything like that. And if you're regular listeners, you realize now I don't drink anymore, but I do dispense them, and that is some monkey to have on your back to have to sneak those. And if you feel you have to sneak it, you may be in a bad relationship, or you might have a drinking problem. So there's probably other reasons too. You could be in a community. Well, that's a bad relationship. You could be in a community that doesn't eschew drinking. They're sober people. I know there's a group of people that had a couple months back. They were sober friends of mine, people I know from the group in the front of the phone book, where they would be in the front of the phone book if we still had phone books. They came up and ordered drinks, and they were sneaking them. And I said, well, they know, so don't worry about it. So the last thing I'll have to say before I move on, I'm going to talk about. Well, I did mention a mask, but there's new studies coming out of Spain that there's no support for the herd immunity angle, according to this study in Spain, that the existence of antibodies, after giving it some significant time after having COVID-19, does not make it less tenable that you will pick it up again. So the herd immunity idea is you get 70% of the population infected, and there's enough antibodies out there that whenever it starts spreading again, those 70% of people don't become active carriers. But if you can carry again and spread again, and get sick again, then there's no effective. And first of all, if it did work, it takes a long time to build a herd immunity. You don't build a herd immunity in a year. It takes a couple of years. So I'm going to mention this one. It was interesting because a friend of mine mentioned it's called King Baby. There was a book called King Baby, and there's a King Baby syndrome. And it's based on a syndrome because think of a baby. When especially human infants. Humans have the longest kind of like care relationship between parents and their children. Taking a long time for the children to mature, for them to take care of themselves. So the baby, when they're infants and toddlers and things like that, babies they have a self-centered need for gratification. They need food, warmth, security, attention, care. And self-sufficiency emerges as a process of maturation. But for some people, they may be able to do some things, but they don't quite let go of that King Baby syndrome. And that's where the King Baby syndrome comes on. And it's some of the things are, oh God, let's see. I wrote these down. It's I'm special or unique, which you know what, you are special or unique, but so is everyone else. If you can recognize, I can't get enough, or I'm the best. That's on the same thing. I can't get enough when I'm the best. That's a big thing. There's maybe don't trust anyone. My needs are never being met. That's in the same. You got to get my own way. I got to get my own way. Other ways to strike my ego. Others envy me, or they just don't care. And so I want these other things, these personality traits they have, is they become angry or afraid at of authority figures. So when if they're in authority, maybe not so much problem, but when they're um, out, they do have a problem with authority figures. They seek approval, and sometimes they lose their identity in the process. So they're always constantly seeking approval from their followers. Um, they want to make a good um, impression, but they have a problem completing things like big projects. Let's say maybe building a wall or something like that. They have a very big problem accepting criticism. They're hypersensitive. Yeah, you can't say anything. Oh my God, forget about it. They have a difficulty sustaining healthy relationships. They have addictive personalities. They're driven to extremes. They have been immobilized by anger and frustration. So they get angry and it's hard to, they're rarely satisfied. They're given to exaggeration or showing off. So they're always talking about how great, they are and how big their audience is and stuff. And a lot of times they feel, this is something you may not know, they feel lonely even when they're surrounded by people. And they need those people around them that feel okay. That's conversely, even though they feel lonely. They tend to say, I know a lot. I've done that before. I know. You have to know that. You want to admit that you didn't know that. I didn't know that. I'm not aware of that. They feel like they don't fit in. They complain and blame others for what is going wrong. They see the world as a jungle full of selfish people when they're the selfish person. They see things as a catastrophe. Oh my God, that's easy for me to say. It's all or nothing thinking. They judge life in absolutes, black and white, right and wrong, blah, blah, blah. Live too much in the past and fearful of the future. Have a strong feeling of dependence with fears of abandonment. Okay, well, have taken advantage of others for their own needs. Fear failure and rejection, so don't try new things. Are concerned, very overly concerned with things and money. So they always have this thing. They're very object-oriented or money-oriented. They fantasize and dream really big plans and just out of the, just really fantasize, almost like manic. They're around their superiors. Now, these are people around their superiors. They're charming, but they really like to boss their subordinates. So if they're in the middle of the chain, you can see how the bosses may misinterpret seeing someone as being, somewhat diplomatic and a good leader because of the way they treat with them, but they treat their subordinates much shittier. And a lot of times they're not even in a position to be subordinates. They think they're just favored. They believe the normal rules don't apply to them, so they'll try to talk about enforcing whatever they think are the rules, and then they'll just not follow them. They're very action oriented. They live life in the fast lane, so there may be a lot of drugs, maybe alcohol, maybe thrill seeking. They don't emotional pain. They kind of store it up inside, and they lose touch with their own feelings. And so the main thing with these people is that they should really think, if they can really think about this really hard when you're coming up, it's okay to be the center of your own universe, but it's not okay to expect you to be the center of everyone else's. So we know a guy, girl, man, or woman who their thing is their thing, and you should be concerned about it. You're not. I know a lot of people that they've asked me how my family's doing, stuff like that, and I've just not asked in return how they doing, how your family, how so and not listening when they tell me. I mean, that's selfishness. I realize that a lot of the pains and sufferings that I have had in life were brought on by myself. And I'm not trying to be overly empathetic. I'm just saying there's a balance to be concerned with other people and concerned with yours. You got to take care of your own business, do the best you can at taking care of yours and your own, right? Because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others. And if you don't take care of the people around you, then you're scrambling all the time to just meet those basic needs. Like if you're not paying your bills, if you're not putting food on the table, if you're not making sure you got medicine, you've got to make sure you have clothes, your kids going to school, blah, 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 blah. Yes, it's a lot of things going on. But you can take those and meet those and be ambitious about it. And then you can go on and extend that empathy and caring to other people, not overdoing it. Let me say, not overdoing it. You're feeling bad about someone else's pain and suffering is not what will help them. Yours, we've done. I think you know about that truckload of prayers going your way. If someone, obviously, if someone's seeking spiritual confidence, problem or something like that, you can't do anything other than sending prayers. That's fine. But if they're hungry or need a job opportunity or they need psychiatric help, there's other things you can do. If they're thinking about hurting themselves, there's things you can do. If they're looking for companionship or someone to talk to, there are things you can do. So, you could be active. You could think outside yourself. You could try to do. Once you start thinking outside yourself, you start losing those tendencies that make it difficult for you to see other people's perspective, like being asked to wear a mask when you come into a crowded place. Oh, I just put my makeup on. Look at me, I'm beautiful. How the fuck can I put a makeup? You want me to put a mask on? I just spent all the time with makeup. Are you kidding me? Well, you're gonna what people see when you walk into a room where everyone else is wearing a mask when they're walking into a room is not a beautiful woman, but a selfish asshole who doesn't give a shit, and self-centered. So you got to get out of that view. You can still be beautiful. It's all right to be beautiful. People, you can be envied. You can be envied by your peers, but you know what? Follow the rules first. You know what? Get in the pool. When I say get in the pool, start thinking a little about someone else. Think about the people you're with first, maybe. Think about the people you're with, care about the people you're with, and then try to extend that to other people that are around you. The person serving you, the person delivering your propane. All those things. The person that's the clerk at the store who's, ringing up your grocery items. How are you today? Thank you for doing your job. How it's not that hard. And once you're just doing one of those things, it takes you out of yourself. And I think you're really doing that people that are stuck with this narcissistic. It's basically a narcissistic disorder. You're hurting yourselves more. I'm not into the talk about how evil it is and stuff like that. But this selfishness thing, what you're talking about, there's no true happiness to it. There's been some books probably written or movies about people that are truly happy in the end being totally narcissistic. I'm sure there's the exception to the rule. But there's, true happiness does not lie in just thinking about yourself in a ever smaller circle. it's think about other people. Once you could do something like that, not overdoing it. Like I said, there's the bleeding deacon where you're punishing yourself in order to show you care about someone else. You don't have to punish yourself. All you have to do is care, do the best you can, and then move on with your life. That's it. That's all that's required. And we can get a hold of this thing. We certainly can get a hold of this thing if we just, observe those rules. Wear a mask, have safe distance. Oh, there. I don't know if you hear this. I'll be quiet. That's a fighter jet, either coming from Key West or from Homestead, doing a flyover. That happens a lot down here. We got a lot of pilots that live down this area. But this is Jim the Keys bartender. I'd like to thank you for listening. Sorry if I went along too long. I know it sounded like I'm a little selfish, just selfish about my point of view, but it is my podcast. And if you are listening to that, thank you. And if you think one of your friends would like to listen, please share it with them. Ask them to become subscribers. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I'll be back later on this week, probably tomorrow. Not tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow. Who knows? But tomorrow is another day. And I'd like to thank you for listening. And take care, everyone. Bye.